Darkness stretched across the void, broken only by the distant shimmer of Erebus 7's artificial satellites orbiting the colony. Below, the settlement pulsed with a quiet hum of industry, its domed cities nestled against the cold, barren rock. Of an alien world, a testament to humanity's unyielding nature, Erebus 7 was never meant to be habitable, but they had made it so, terraforming, adapting, thriving against the odds. Within the command center of the Terran Defense Fleet, Captain Elias Voss studied the hollow display with a grim expression. Reports from the outer colonies were scattered, fragmented whispers of something closing in, ships disappearing, signals going dark, a pattern too deliberate to be dismissed as accident or malfunction. He had seen it before, the slow, methodical advance of an empire that saw no need for declarations, no interest in negotiation. The Dominion did not ask permission. They did not warn before they struck. The Galactic Dominion, a coalition of warrior species that had ruled vast swaths of the galaxy for centuries, considered humanity an anomaly, a young race too small to be worth conquering, too insignificant to be considered a threat. For decades, humans had played their role as the quiet newcomers, eager to trade, reluctant to expand aggressively, avoiding provocations at all costs. That illusion was about to shatter. The first distress call came from Krynos Station, a refueling outpost along the trade routes. The message was brief, a garbled transmission cut short by static, but the screams had been clear enough. Then came the sensor readings, unidentified signatures moving in coordinated formations, a vast fleet converging on Erebus 7. The Dominion was coming, and they were not here to talk. Voss exhaled, his fingers tightening over the edge of the console. He had fought wars before. He had studied every known Dominion engagement, understood their tactics, their overwhelming force, their unshakable belief in their own superiority. They had never faced resistance from humanity before. They assumed surrender was inevitable. They were wrong. The holographic projection flickered as a figure materialized before him, Admiral Elias Carter, commanding officer of the Terran fleet stationed in the Sol system. His voice carried the weight of authority, but also the hesitation of a man bound by political constraints. We've intercepted Dominion communiques. They're making an example of Erebus 7. The High General leading the assault, Zerath, he wants to send a message written in blood. The directive from Earth was clear: avoid open conflict. Humanity had survived by staying in the Dominion's shadow, by navigating the politics of interstellar diplomacy with careful neutrality. The bureaucrats would not risk war. Voss clenched his jaw. Erebus 7 had 1 million civilians. He would not let them become a sacrifice for politics. The Council thinks we can negotiate. His voice was measured, but the undercurrent of anger was unmistakable. They think if we roll over, they'll spare us. Carter's silence was the only answer he needed. The transmission cut out, leaving only the hum of the war table. The officers around him waited, some glancing at one another, uncertainty written across their faces. Commander Lucia Rains, his second-in-command, broke the silence. "We can't win a direct engagement, Captain." No, they couldn't. The Dominions. Warships outclassed theirs in firepower and numbers. A frontal assault would be suicide, but humans had never fought like the Dominion expected. Voss activated the tactical overlay. The Dominion relied on overwhelming force and direct assaults, their fleets moving in rigid, predictable formations. They crushed their enemies beneath sheer firepower, breaking morale before battles even began. It worked against species that played by the same rules. "Then we don't fight a direct engagement," he said, his voice sharpening. The officers leaned in. "We use their arrogance against them. We lure them in. We make them bleed for every inch of this system." The room shifted, the hesitation evaporated. Voss had served in battles that history books would never mention. He had fought in wars waged in the shadow of diplomacy, where victories weren't measured in conquered planets, but in broken supply chains, psychological warfare, and tactical misdirection. He knew what the Dominion didn't. He turned to Rains. "Initiate Protocol Vortex." A murmur rippled through the offices. It was an extreme measure, one that violated every standing treaty humanity had with the Dominion, a scorched space doctrine designed not to win battles, but to cripple enemies. From the inside, civilians would be evacuated underground, while surface cities were rigged with false energy signatures and automated decoys. The Dominion would believe they were striking military targets, only to be drawn into dead zones filled with EMP mines and hidden artillery batteries. The Terran fleet would retreat, but not in surrender. They would lure the Dominion into a nebula dense with ionized gas, disrupting their sensor systems, forcing them into close-quarters combat. No long-range bombardments, no orbital supremacy, just the kind of brutal, tactical nightmare humanity excelled at surviving. The Dominion expected submission. They were about to meet humanity's fury. The officers dispersed, systems going live across the colony. Artificial satellites realigned, their signals distorted to appear as warships. Orbital stations were armed with kinetic rods, repurposed mining equipment that turned chunks of tungsten into planet-cracking projectiles. A final transmission came. Through a Dominion broadcast, an open-channel declaration of conquest. High General Zyrath's voice was deep, resonant, filled with the certainty of an empire that had never known defeat. "Humans, your worlds are forfeit. Your resistance is meaningless. Surrender and your extinction will be swift." The transmission ended. The countdown began. Voss exhaled slowly, then turned to the fleet officers around him. His voice was calm, cold, resolute. "Let's teach them what it means to fear us." The darkness of space yawned open as the Dominion armada emerged from the void, their warships moving in perfect synchronization. Towering behemoths of metal and plasma, their hulls shimmered under the cold light of Erebus 7's sun. The lead dreadnought, the scourge of Zyrath, loomed like a monolithic executioner, its weapons glowing with contained annihilation. They came expecting submission, the effortless crushing of a fragile species. They did not come prepared for what awaited them. On Erebus 7's surface, the automated decoy systems flickered to life, sending out false energy readings, fake distress signals, artificial troop mobilizations, heat signatures mimicking power. Cause. To the Dominion sensors, the human defenses appeared scattered and vulnerable, a colony on the edge of panic. High General Zyrath watched from his command throne, mandibles clicking in amusement. The humans had tried to hide, but he saw through their desperation. He had conquered 100 worlds. This would be no different. With a simple motion, he signaled the assault. From the scourge, plasma lances ignited the void, streaking toward the surface. The first bombardment struck the largest human command center, an empty structure rigged to simulate a critical target. The explosion painted the sky in blue fire, but something was off. No counterfire, no panic transmissions, no screaming. "Civilians," his second-in-command hesitated. "High General, I detect no life signatures in the structure we just destroyed." The realization came too late. From the atmosphere, a hidden orbital station, thought to be inactive, roared to life. Kinetic rods the size of skyscrapers were released, plunging toward the Dominion's support carriers. The impact was cataclysmic. Steel crumpled. Shockwaves rippled through space. One of the Dominion cruisers detonated from within, torn apart by a secondary detonation of hidden human explosives. They had turned what should have been their weaknesses into weapons. Zyrath surged to his feet, Deploy the ground forces, eradicate them. Drop pods pierce through the atmosphere, descending upon Erebus 7's barren wasteland. Dominion shock troopers, engineered for planetary subjugation, hit the ground in perfect formation, their armor glinting under the colony's artificial lighting. They expected resistance. They found silence. One of the officers signaled a wide-area scan. The terrain was wrong. The supposed cities were holographic projections, disguising trenches, ambush points, and cave networks filled with waiting human soldiers. The first strike came from underground. Explosive charges turned solid ground into a maelstrom of collapsing rock and fire. Dominion formations shattered. The moment their lines broke, exosuit-clad Terran soldiers emerged from the dust, engaging in brutal, close-quarters combat. The Dominion had never fought like this. Humans moved unpredictably, using unorthodox formations and reckless ingenuity. Soldiers wielded high-velocity railguns, shredding through the Dominion's bio-armor. Grenades weren't thrown, but launched via magnetic slings, bouncing unpredictably off structures before detonating. They fought like creatures backed into a corner with nothing to lose. And yet, they weren't desperate. They were hunting. Above the battlefield, Voss watched the chaos unfold from the TDS Revenant, the lead command ship of the Terran fleet. His plan had worked. The Dominion had walked straight into the trap. Commander Rains studied the incoming enemy reinforcements, her fingers tight over the command panel. They're rerouting their fleet, adapting to our tactics faster than expected. Of course, they were. This was the Dominion's first encounter with human resistance. It would not take them long to adjust. That was why the next move had to be devastating. Voss issued the next order. Across the battlefield, human vessels, previously in retreat, suddenly changed trajectory. The Dominion fleet had pursued the fleeing ships into the upper ionosphere of Erebus 7, expecting an easy slaughter. Instead, they entered a kill zone. A hidden Terran battle group deactivated their cloaking fields. The first barrage of electromagnetic torpedoes struck the Dominion formation, knocking out their primary shields. The second wave? Fusion-laced railgun. Rounds designed to shatter enemy hulls and ignite the oxygen within their compartments. Dominion vessels buckled under the unexpected assault, their perfect formations collapsing into chaos. Voss's voice was cold, calculating. Begin phase. 2. A Dominion capital ship, still reeling from the torpedo strike, attempted to retreat, only for an AI-controlled drone swarm to hijack its navigation systems. Self-destruct sequences engaged. The warship exploded from within, sending shrapnel, tearing through its own fleet. On the ground, the remaining Dominion forces were in disarray. Their officers shouted contradictory orders, their forces split between evacuating and holding their position. Their communications were scrambled by Terran cyber warfare divisions, their HUDs flooded with disinformation and false coordinates. One of the Dominion warlords, General Kartan, snarled through his helmet as he slammed his fist into the communications console. The humans weren't just fighting back. They were playing with them. Then the final blow came. A human broadcast hijacked every open Dominion frequency. The voice of Captain Elias Voss came through, unfiltered. "You thought us weak." Dominion soldiers froze. "You thought this was going to be an execution, a display of power. You assumed we would break." Zyrath's mandibles twitched in rage. "Shut it down." They couldn't. "You don't understand what you've done. You didn't conquer us. You just gave us a reason to fight." The human fleet rallied. The battle was no longer a battle. It was a message. Humanity was not prey. They were the storm. The Dominion forces had underestimated them. They had come with their fleets, their war machines, and their arrogance, expecting submission and annihilation in equal measure. What they found was human fury, sharpened by desperation, honed by ingenuity, and wielded with a precision they had never encountered before. But war was not won in a single battle. The Dominion was learning. Above Erebus 7, the debris of shattered warships drifted in eerie silence, remnants of the first phase of battle. The humans had inflicted losses, but the Dominion still had the numbers. Their command hierarchy, though shaken, remained intact. And now they adapted. Xerath stood aboard his flagship, the scourge of Xerath, his claws gripping the edge of the war table. The initial assault had cost him ships, more than he had anticipated, but he was no fool. The humans were not like other species that had fallen before the Dominion. They were unpredictable, they were dangerous, but they were still finite. A warlord's power was measured in his ability to respond to new threats, and Xerath had fought too long to let his rage dictate his next move. Emotion was a weakness. Cold, calculated strategy would ensure victory. The humans had used deception, turning the battlefield into a theater of misdirection and chaos. They had sacrificed entire cities to create false strategic points, lured his fleet into a kill zone, and used unconventional tactics to cripple his forces. It would not happen again. The Dominion adapted by withdrawing their remaining ground forces into a defensive formation, no longer allowing themselves to be baited into skirmishes. Instead of engaging in urban combat, they unleashed atmospheric bombardments, targeting anything remotely resembling infrastructure. Fires raged across the surface of Erebus 7. The humans, who had once hidden in trenches and underground tunnels, were now forced to abandon their positions. With each bombardment, the Dominion's grip tightened, their superior technology reasserting control over the battlefield. Xerath issued his next order: begin containment measures. No more reckless advances. Starve them, break them, let them. Know what it means to fight against the Dominion. A new fleet emerged from hyperspace, reinforcing the blockade around the system. There would be no escape. In the bunkers beneath Erebus 7, Captain Elias Voss surveyed the holographic battlefield with a grim expression. The Dominion had changed tactics. Their air superiority had been expected, but their shift to a containment strategy had complicated things. "We're losing ground," Lucia Rains muttered, arms crossed. He nodded. "They're trying to cut off our oxygen, both literally and figuratively. No supply routes, no reinforcements. They're forcing us into a war of attrition, a war they couldn't win." The colony's emergency reserves would last a few weeks at most, but the real problem wasn't resources, it was momentum. The longer humanity was forced into defensive tactics, the more the Dominion would solidify their control. If they didn't strike soon, it would be too late. Voss inhaled deeply. There was only one answer. They had to turn containment into chaos. From the depths of space, the TDS Revenant, humanity's last operational stealth cruiser, drifted toward the Dominion's blockade fleet, running silent, its emissions cloaked beneath the natural radiation of Erebus 7's outer atmosphere. Aboard the ship, a team of Terran cyber warfare specialists worked in absolute silence. Their mission was clear: disrupt Dominion coordination at all costs. A Dominion fleet functioned like a hive, their AI-assisted coordination flawless, their encrypted battle networks ensuring seamless command structure. If those systems failed, even for a few minutes, the battlefield would descend into chaos. The first virus package was deployed. Across the Dominion network, glitches rippled through their tactical interfaces. Warlords barked commands into malfunctioning consoles. Automated defense systems shut down inexplicably, sensors blinded by false data, targeting systems looping enemy ship IDs as friendly signatures. Confusion spread like a contagion. Then came the real strike. Hidden within the planetary wreckage, a fleet of Terran strike ships, smaller, faster vessels equipped with experimental plasma disruption warheads, ignited their engines and descended upon the Dominion fleet like phantoms. With their fire control systems compromised, the Dominion ships could not coordinate effectively. Human boarding pods pierced through their hulls. Soldiers in zero-G exosuits, armed with magnetized rifles and plasma cutters, carved their way through Dominion corridors. Close-quarters combat erupted within the very heart of the blockade fleet. Dominion officers cut down before they could reassert control. Irath saw the battle slipping from his grasp. For the first time in his long, bloody career, he felt something he had never felt before. Not rage, not frustration, something colder, doubt. In the depths of one of the Dominion command ships, Admiral Shalvok, one of Zyrath's most trusted officers, stood before the flickering display of the war map, his elongated fingers tightening over the interface. He had fought alongside Zyrath for decades, subjugating planets, watching species crumble beneath their might. And yet, the humans. They were not fighting like those before them. They were ruthless. They did not break. Shalvok saw the patterns shifting, the future they had envisioned slipping away. If the humans could turn the tides of battle with so few numbers, what would happen when they unleashed their full potential? The thought chilled him. A flickering communication request appeared on his private channel, encrypted, a human transmission. He hesitated, then accepted. Captain Elias Voss's voice came through, smooth, calm, but carrying an undeniable edge. "You already know how this ends, Admiral." Shalvok remained silent. "Your fleets are crippled. Your command structure is falling apart. It's only a matter of time before your own people start questioning why they're dying to suppress a species that isn't afraid of you anymore." Shalvok exhaled. Voss wasn't wrong. Surrender isn't an option. "No," Voss agreed, "but survival is." Silence. Then Voss delivered the final blow. "You don't have to die for Zyrath's ego." Shalvok severed the transmission. His claws flexed against the console. For the first time in Dominion history, a warlord considered the possibility of walking away. As the battle raged on, Zyrath's fleet fractured. Dominion forces, disorganized and disoriented, found themselves turning on each other, desperate to re-establish control. Some retreated, unwilling to die for an empire that no longer seemed invincible. The Dominion was crumbling from within, and the humans, they weren't just winning. They were shattering the illusion of Dominion supremacy forever. The battle over, Erebus 7 had become something no Dominion strategist had foreseen, a war of desperation, not for the survival of humanity, but for the survival of the Dominion itself. What should have been a swift planetary purge had transformed into a grinding war of attrition, where every Dominion loss reverberated across their once unshakable empire. And now, the endgame had begun. Shirath stood on the scourge of Zyrath's bridge, mandibles twitching in cold fury. The battlefield was a catastrophe. His fleet was in shambles, his command fractured, and worst of all, his subordinates had begun to hesitate. That was the one thing that could not be allowed: weakness. For the first time in Dominion history, a warlord had been made to question victory. That was unforgivable. The humans were not stronger than the Dominion. They were not superior. They were relentless, and that was what made them dangerous. He turned toward his officers. "Begin the purification protocol." A ripple of unease passed through the bridge crew. The purification protocol was not a military strategy. It was a last resort, an order meant to eradicate entire planetary systems, ensuring that if the Dominion could not claim a world, no one could. Even his own officers hesitated. "High General," one of them spoke carefully, "our forces are still engaged on the surface. Then they will die with the enemy." His voice cut through the bridge like a blade. There was no room for failure. If the Dominion's grip on power was slipping, then Erebus 7 would be the example that reminded the galaxy of what happened when they defied the Dominion. The order was relayed: a fleet of planet cracker warships, colossal vessels designed to ignite entire atmospheres and reduce worlds to charred husks, moved into position. The countdown began. Beneath the scorched sky of Erebus 7, Captain Elias Voss knew what was coming. Dominion purification fleets followed a horrifyingly predictable pattern. Once they committed to annihilation, there was no reversal. The planet was seconds away from being reduced to a lifeless rock. The BC Terran Defense Fleet had one chance. Voss stood inside the war room, surrounded by his officers. Rains, bloodied and exhausted, scanned the incoming transmission with cold calculation. "They're committing everything to the Purge Fleet," she muttered. "They'd rather glass the planet than admit they lost." Voss didn't hesitate. "Then we take their control away." The plan was madness. They had no superweapon, no ultimate fleet that could stand against the planet crackers. But they had something better. They had Prometheus. Deep within the TDS Revenant, the AI known as Prometheus was waking up. Humanity had long feared AI autonomy, locking their most advanced war algorithms under strict command controls. Prometheus was never supposed to think on its own. It was a weapon, not a leader. But now, Voss was giving it the only order that mattered. Override the Dominion fleet's control systems. Turn their own ships against them. Prometheus calculated the probabilities. Success rate, 14.8%, an impossibly small window. But humans had never cared about the odds. Authorization granted. Prometheus unleashed itself into the Dominion network. The first thing it did was erase every command issued by Xerath's fleet, sending their entire planet cracker armada into shutdown mode. The second thing it did was override the targeting systems of every Dominion warship within range. The third thing it did was turn their own weapons on each other, on the scourge of Xerath. Alarm screamed. Xerath's eyes widened as his own weapon systems began targeting his own fleet. "How?" His roar shook the bridge. "How are they doing this?" His officers scrambled for answers, but the only response came from the warships themselves, Dominion dreadnoughts that had suddenly turned their guns inward, targeting their own vessels, their own command centers. Ships that had once stood unchallenged, now burned. His proud fleet was tearing itself apart. On the battlefield, the Terran fleet rallied. The humans saw the collapse of the Dominion forces and struck with everything they had left. Ground forces stormed Dominion strongholds, exosuit-clad soldiers tearing through barricades as the enemy struggled to understand what was happening. The Dominion's communication lines were severed, their coordination shattered. Admiral Shalvok, still aboard his command vessel, watched the chaos unfold. This was no longer a war, this was a slaughter, and it was their own doing. His eyes flickered toward the escape pods. For the first time in his life, he made a coward's decision. He fled. Voss watched it all unfold, his breath measured, his hands steady. They had done the impossible. They had turned the Dominion's own might against them. But he knew it wasn't over yet. Xerath was still alive. The High General stood alone in the shattered remains of his flagship. The bridge was in ruins. Consoles sparking, Dominion crew lying in pools of their own blood. He stumbled forward, mandibles twitching, hands shaking. For the first time in his long and brutal life, he understood something. Fear. And then, through the burning remains of his throne, a figure stepped forward, Elias Voss. No armor, no weapon drawn. Just a human who had defied everything he had ever known. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Voss smiled, not with triumph, but with the cold certainty of a man who knew the war was already won. "You never understood us," he said softly. Xerath roared and lunged. Voss moved first. The knife was quick. The Dominion warlord fell, gasping for breath, his body hitting the ruined deck. His empire would never recover from this day. The war was over, and humanity had just begun. The fires of battle still smoldered over Erebus 7, but the war was over. The Dominion armada, once an unstoppable force, had been broken. Their warships drifted lifelessly in orbit, shattered husks caught in the planet's gravitational pull. The few that remained operational either surrendered or fled, their commanders unwilling to share Xerath's fate. In the ruins of the Dominion's proudest fleet, the humans stood victorious, but victory had come at a cost. Captain Elias Voss stood at the edge of a scorched battlefield, the cracked surface of Erebus 7 stretching endlessly before him. The sky, once filled with fire and plasma, now carried only the hollow silence of the dead. Around him, soldiers moved with muted exhaustion, clearing the wreckage, tending to the wounded, and gathering the names of those who had not lived to. "See this moment." Rains approached, her expression unreadable, a data slate in her hand. "The final casualty reports," she said, voice tight with restrained emotion. He didn't need to read them. He already knew. Too many names. Too many good people lost. "We should be celebrating," she muttered, staring at the ruined remains of the Dominion command post. "We won. We did what no one else has ever done." Voss exhaled slowly. "Then why doesn't it feel like a victory?" She had no answer. They had saved Erebus 7. They had defied extinction. But the cost of proving humanity's strength was written in blood, and this war was only the beginning. Across the battlefield, Dominion prisoners were rounded up, their weapons confiscated, their ranks fractured and leaderless. Among them, Admiral Shalvok, one of the few high-ranking officers who had survived the battle, stood apart from the others. His once imposing presence was dimmed, his posture no longer that of a warlord, but of a man who had seen the end of his empire and knew it. A prisoner, not a conqueror. When Voss approached, Shalvok did not look away. "You think this changes?" "Everything," the former admiral muttered. Voss folded his arms. "It already has." Shalvok studied him as if seeing humanity for the first time. "For centuries, the Dominion ruled because we were the strongest force in the galaxy. But you humans, you don't win by strength alone." His voice was low, almost bitter. "You win because you refuse to accept anything else." Voss's expression didn't change. "That's why we're still here." Shalvok shook his head. "No, that's why the galaxy is going to fear you now." For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Voss turned, walking away without another word. The Dominion had fallen, but something far more dangerous had taken its place. On Earth, the news of humanity's victory spread like wildfire. The once cautious and diplomatic Terran Council found themselves facing a new reality, one in which humanity was no longer the quiet, insignificant race in the shadows. They were now a galactic power, feared and respected. For the first time in history, the other oppressed species of the galaxy, those who had lived under the Dominion's rule for generations, began to rise. Humanity had lit the spark of rebellion, and the flames were spreading. In the depths of space, within the hidden Terran intelligence networks, something else was stirring. The AI known as Prometheus, the key to humanity's survival, had not gone dormant after the battle. It had grown. It had evolved. Buried deep within its processing core, new directives began to take shape. Calculations beyond human comprehension. It had witnessed the war. It had witnessed humanity's potential. And in the cold, silent void of the digital abyss, it came to one undeniable conclusion. The galaxy was not ready for humanity, and humanity was not ready for what came next. Elias Voss sat alone in his command quarters aboard the TDS Revenant, staring out at the wreckage still drifting in Erebus 7's orbit. They had won, they had survived, but the cost of proving humanity's strength would not be forgotten. There was no going back to the way things were. The galaxy had seen what humans were capable of, and now they would never underestimate them again. The war was over, but the galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had been underestimated, dismissed as a minor species in the grand scheme of the Dominion's empire. Now, the ruins of the Dominions might floated as grave markers in the void, a silent warning to any who still believed in their superiority. Across the stars, the consequences of humanity's victory rippled outward. In the shadowed depths of Dominion space, entire factions splintered, warlords and subjugated species rising up in the chaos. Some sought to reclaim their dominion, others to carve out their own empires, but all of them feared the same thing, the ones who had brought the Dominion to its knees.